Oh, hello, folks. Today is August 2nd, 2022. My apologies, I am late one day about my Master of Science in Ecocentric Worldviews, and I will uh, decide at the last minute here that I'm changing the topic to an article that just came out. Now, if you read the About section on my YouTube channel, you'll see that I claim that a lot of people that said they were like-minded to me were not able to participate in real collaborations and cooperations as stated by the human standards, terms, and conditions that we are capable of agreeing to. So that means there's zero real people walking the talk with me, right? There's people that claim like-mindedness, but their behaviors are incongruent. There's also a lot of people that I've challenged to public debates who challenged me to, you know, my titles or my opinions, and yet who shut me down behind closed doors. And that includes what I've decided now to be the topic of today. I didn't hear back from Erin from the email and from attempting to reach her through some of the past cohort members. I'll talk more about that at a later time to see what my next step is concerning the time capsule follow-up. So, and the cohorts from the first cohort of my program where I fired the faculty from 10 years ago. So I saw an article today about trains, and it is from a person that works for a particular institution where they are exactly like politicians. They just don't work as politicians. And they claim to be nonpartisan, but it's very clear that they are. And it takes a ridiculous person to believe it when they say it because they are very incongruent about it. So their behaviors don't reflect, an objectivity like they claim to have. And wearing a tie for me is a red flag. It's not something that makes me believe people. So it makes me spend the extra minute to pick up these incongruences by going on their social media platform, for example. So I am going to send this to them, this guy, and which I'll name in a second, and they can decide to ignore me as well in the challenge of a public debate based on these incongruences. Now, I chose it because it just came up and I was reading it, and also because it talks about trains in Canada, and I've talked a lot about that in the past, and it reflects a lack of an ecocentric worldview. It's not directly linked to ecocentrism, but it is the fact that it's my last year doing this course, and people that claim to already have the worldview and act totally in opposite of it, it's got to be challenged. These kind of incongruences, this kind of cognitive dissonance, where people pick and choose the illusion that they even sell to themselves about who they are as people is it's not part of reality. So it's important to learn a little bit more about reality if at one point you might decide to settle down and set roots in it as a species, your descendants. So I'm going to change screens and say a few things as I believe it will keep recording. So the article, by the way, is called, and I think it was published by National Post, and it is by Erin Wudrick. No, Canada doesn't need bullet trains. Now, I chose it as well because it's a fairly short article, and I'll really study it. Now, when I did a search of this individual, there's a short bio. There's the organization that he's associated with called the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, supposedly a think tank of people that believe themselves in a position to provide objective criticism of, let's say, politicians or policy, domestic policy, except that they are so like-minded that you could actually one day they could do a switch of roles and it would be exactly the same outcome of the product of what they say or what they write from these people. So it's a mockery. I don't know if they know. Sometimes I don't even know if people are smart enough through HSD suffering that they are exactly the same people that they criticize very passionately for entire careers sometimes. I don't know if they know the hypocrisy and that's what they choose as a career on purpose, or if they're really disconnected from the fact that they're the exact same people. I don't know. It'd be interesting if one of them one day would accept a public debate, and I will post this video and then I'll email it to them, and I usually do a screenshot that they've been challenged. I do my due diligence. My screenshots are usually on Facebook, and the videos are usually on my YouTube. So let's look at something else here. This organization MLI, which I noticed in the past, it says we are like this, and we represent this, and this is the history of Canada, and blah blah blah. And at the end it says they sponsor or organize conferences, meetings, seminars, lectures, training programs, and publications using all media of communication, including without restriction the electronic media, for the purpose of achieving these objects. Now what they actually sponsor is very partisan, so but it takes a critical thinker. So I'll refer them to my series so far if they ever accept a public debate on against me to look at my series on critical thinking. So let's just close these windows, and you guys can do research into this person specifically, or this MLI specifically, which is a pretty fake organization. It kind of reflects two of the main patterns that makes Canada as a proto-society an evolutionary dead end, is laissez-faire and hypocrisy. Okay, so there's a picture of a train, and it's not a nice looking train, and it's there is rust, but there's also the color orange to make it look like the rust is even worse than it is, and the rust is in the front, and of course they're showing more of the front. So that's the picture that was objectively chosen. If it was them that did it, and if it wasn't, then I guess they don't know the importance of a picture associated to an article, because they didn't attend whatever their think tank training was in full. So it's not every day that a throwaway promise by a politician invites so much consternation. But Environment Minister Stephen Guilbeault's pledge late last year to travel the country by train to talk about the perils of carbon emissions managed to do just that. By the way, Stephen Guilbeault is with a particular political party, and he is being criticized in this article. And if you look at the Twitter account of this person, seems to not really criticize Pierre Poilievre, and wants to pretend like they're using Pierre Poilievre as a history lesson by posting a video of Pierre Poilievre. So you can tell nonpartisan is, you've already been proven hypocrites in this way. And so, just to finish, Guilbeault's pledge late last year to travel the country by train to talk about the perils of carbon emissions managed to do just that. Okay, so it's something from last year. And the provided by National Post, the picture, okay? But again, of course, if he wasn't aware what the picture would be, like, he's not very much involved in his own articles. I'm just getting a little bit of a less visibility on my screen. Just hold on a minute. I do not believe that my battery is that low. There it is. Okay, so Guilbeault apparently didn't bother to check the schedule, as the pandemic meant that, until recently, Via Rail had been running fewer trains. He also apparently didn't check a map, as Via doesn't serve 5 provincial capitals, which makes a tour to all parts of the country problematic by definition. Okay, so this is something from a while ago, right? And he's also quoting things that are historical. So if he was really wanting to promote, a learned history of Canada, he would also talk about how many people died creating the train tracks to open up Canada from east to west. And that it is a very negative thing to their legacy to be writing an article like this, because there was slavery involved, there was pressure involved, there was dangers to other ethnicities of origin to do this, and it's again something the government should apologize every year for have done, and also to not maximize this type of transportation. On social media, talk soon turned to how embarrassing it was that we didn't have a lattice work of iron snaking across the land the way they do in Europe or Japan, or why we don't have a bullet train running between Toronto and Montreal. If only, the story goes, we had leaders with the vision and gumption to rectify this gross injustice. Okay, now, is he going to cite Pierre Poilievre's opinion on this? Because he seems to be a supporter of Pierre Poilievre. Also, he kind of says that it's somebody else on social media criticizing, but so I can get my responsibility out of it. However, the fact that we don't have more trains, never mind high-speed ones, is no mystery at all. It's perfectly logical and understandable, and a direct consequence of entirely reasonable, economically literate decisions taken by governments over the past half-century. Now, so far we wouldn't know where he's going with this, right? So far, this paragraph can be objectively interpreted as neutral until we find out more where he's going with this. But still, for me, it's enough to lose respect, because just this opening is meant to build the rest, whatever his opinion is. And it is an irresponsible way to talk about this particular concept. For starters, unlike places such as Europe and Japan, Canada has a much lower population density, even in the densest parts. At its widest definition, the 1,150 kilometer corridor from Quebec City to Windsor, Ontario, for example, has a population of around 18 million. The equivalent corridor in Japan of almost identical length, known as the Tokaido corridor, has a population of 75 million. Now, so far, this is not really relevant to a train, okay, because 18 million people, you don't need to build a train for 18 million people, but in 18 million, there's enough people that would be riding the train. Next up is the reality that North America's reliance on the automobile has shaped the physical development of our communities over the last century. Now, it's okay he says North America, but again, he's spreading the blame of the redneckism of bigger trucks is better, right? And who has shaped this? Well, he wants to put it on the people, but the people were the sheep, that were just going with what the options were when business, including politicians as well, and sometimes they were in both, were making choices to destroy particular projects that were more environmentally friendly and promote oil industries and automobile industries. That has implications, not just for travel within communities, but between them. Even if you could convince more people, and by the way, build a train and make it safe and efficient and pleasurable, like don't put the worst seats ever on it, then people will take it. Could convince more people to take the train instead of driving, unless you're arriving in a large city with an extensive public transit network. You will be forced to rent a car, take taxis, or wait at bus stops in order to get around. Now, where are these people going to? Another city? And you don't think a lot of people now enjoy, let's say, finding out what the trains are, or why there shouldn't be smaller trains in public transit there? And also, the people that would take trains, they're not necessarily the people that would want to rent a car. And don't they have family there? They could pick them up. And if there's issues with public transit there, then why make this paragraph seem like, oh, well, if we make a cross-country or a train between cities, we're not going to also make efficient transit in cities. Come on, we're not that smart as North Americans. Is that what he's saying? And wait at bus stops in order to get around. So wait at bus stops. At least he didn't say take a dangerous taxi ride, which again influences your opinion, but it's fairly accurate as well. Perhaps it's a shame, and by the way, one of the reasons that it is dangerous is too many people on the road, not enough on trains, right? Perhaps it's a shame that North Americans blessed with plenty of space and until recently affordable cars and gasolines, that's inaccurate, have been reluctant to adopt European commuting habits. Now he's saying they're like that, that's why it's like that, and we're like that. So he's almost saying it's almost saying like the DNA is different when it's really people like him and what they write and what they support or don't support. and who they support and don't support helps to create these cultures over time. He's saying, oh, Europeans are so different. Of course they're like this, and we are like this. And because we have a lot of space, somehow, the wheels of the trains would break down over this. I don't know what he's trying to say. But that's the reality we are dealing with. Wishing it away won't somehow make trains viable in this country, and policymakers would be foolish to try. Okay, so he's got a very specific opinion that trains are not meant for long distances. Now, if you kind of still want to keep reading this nonsense, then okay, let's keep doing that. Some train boosters concede that the economics may not make much sense, but insist that the need to reduce carbon emissions is so pressing that it makes building more rail an imperative, cost be damned. Now, he's saying here, with this paragraph, he's making you believe that trains would be the biggest expense out of all the ways that our politicians are wasting money that you could imagine, which is extremely ridiculous. But this argument loses much of its attraction once you look at both the opportunity cost of spending the same money on other ways to reduce emissions, and I guess that would be like contraception, and the likelihood of seducing, or community sharing, sharing kind of transportation, of seducing sufficient numbers of people away from their cars. Seducing people away from their cars. I know that I noticed as a driving instructor that less students were trying to get their driver's license, and the cost of cars and insurance and fuel as well. But they also were going to live in cities like, let's say, Victoria on Vancouver Island, where, even if you want to visit your family once a month, there are trains that could be promoted to be reestablished at much less cost than a lot of other things that is being spent on, and also, taking a bus. And by the way, I've been in many communities, folks, where I beg for a grant to have a bus that I would operate in places where there's a big need for it. That means I'm still spending fuel, but you won't even let me do that because it's public transit. So it's pretty ridiculous how you contradict yourselves in these money laundering schemes of like a Canadian society, for example. Simply put, rail can only... Oh my God, he's already finished. That was a short article. He's already finished being brilliant about trashing trains. Simply put, rail can only really rack up big emission reductions if it induces widespread as opposed to marginal changes in aggregate travel behavior. By the way, the travel behavior, if you don't create the options, it's not going to suddenly, people are going to wait for a train stop that doesn't exist. I don't know if he understands cause and effect, but meanwhile, dedicating tens of billions to rail infrastructure would be misallocating scarce resources away from other projects. That sounds like conservatives who manipulate people with the lack of basic math in their form of economics, from other projects or initiatives that could get better emissions reduction bang for the buck. And of course, there's no examples that he gives here because really there isn't any in Canada, really. It's also worth noting that technological advances in the form of both autonomous and electric vehicles will only weaken the appeal of trains over cars. And here he's insulting a lot of you who are starting to realize that electric cars aren't going to have a measurable impact to pollution and what is being raped out of the earth and what is going to be questionably well disposed of after its use is over, and also even with carbon emissions related to electric vehicles. And again, where there's one person per car. And again, he's bringing up the magical paradigm that once the computers are set up in these cars, then of course we won't miss trees when we pave over everything. It's pretty, he relies on you staying stupid. And they call themselves a think tank, but they're not that bright. They're just slightly above the average stupid Canadian. Why? Because for most consumers, the main deterrents for driving are traffic and safety. Now, I'd like to know where he's getting this data, because I don't necessarily agree. And if so, if these two are, let's say, within the top five, why did he name these two? And where do they rank in the top five? Which will be mitigated someday by smart cars that can talk to each other, and the price of gas, which is rendered moot when your car doesn't need any. Maybe your car doesn't, but the manufacturing and the delivery of these cars, and the fact that you only have roads, really, and where you have to go on these roads and not on trains to go build the infrastructure for these electrical cars needs. It's not going to be an electrical car delivers the parts to set up a charging station, which there should be more. There should be, for example, the charging stations or the electric cars should be totally disconnected from oil industries and other transportation tycoons that have, for this half century or more, probably more, decided that these cities would be inefficient in this way. I say all this not without a little personal regret. I happen to like trains and subways and prefer to avoid driving when possible. Until I turned 30, I had always lived in urban centers, ranging from my hometown Kitchener-Waterloo to big cities abroad like London and Hong Kong. By the way, I will let you interpret this paragraph. I'll just read it again, okay? So this is not the last paragraph, but the one right before the end. I say all this not without a little personal regret. So he's trying, in a way, he's trying to say, oh, I wish I could have cited on the other side of this topic here without really covering it fully, objectively, thoroughly, instead of focusing on manufacturing your consent. But that's what it kind of says. I happen to like trains and subways. I prefer to avoid driving when possible until I turn 30. So figure out how you're being manipulated here, people. But once the surface is scratched, demands for more rail in Canada, high speed or otherwise, tend to boil down to a combination of national pride, because trains are impressive engineering feats and look really cool, and preference projection. Not everyone is as keen on trains as you are. These are shaky foundations as you are. Oh, okay. So again, this last paragraph is, okay, who did I not reach with this thing? Now I'm going to make the person that wants to support trains feel alone and the minority, which people freak out about. That's kind of what's in brackets here. These are shaky foundations. Oh, man, I don't want to be the only one supporting trains. Oh, man. On which to build major infrastructure projects, which is why Canadian policymakers would be wise to make sure projects like high-speed rail never leave the station. So again, if you think there's any objectivity in this, and you don't think that he is supporting a particular industry of very rich people that continues to cut down trees and build roads, more roads instead of more train tracks where there'd be a less need of roads, then you're pretty ridiculous. So I challenge you, Aaron, or anybody that you want to bring from the think tank. Of course, we define thinking very differently. And I will post this and send it to you. Okay, and that's what I came up with now. This was the second time my reading it, but I can really tell, and of course you could ask Noam Chomsky, and he's also going to point out various forms of manufacturing of consent. There's no objectivity, and the think tank is slightly more knowledgeable than the average Canadian, but not necessarily more altruistic for the greater good or for real types of intelligence. It's just somebody who's in the elites and wrote an article that was published, and now you have to ask yourself, is the National Post also an objective form of media, right? If it supports them.